Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Tevis-Finn recording from room 114. Welcome to the 1920s, part 3, Values and Cultures Clash. That should be apparent from this first slide. Just take a look at some of the photos I have included. Under your guided notes, number 1, nativism resurges. So what is nativism? So you can define it over here on the right as a belief that one's native land needs to be protected against immigrants. During World War I, immigration had declined, but by 1921 it had returned to pre-war levels, with the majority coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. And here are children in the 1920s pictured here playing on Ellis Island. Many Americans blamed immigrants for the recent bombings, strikes, and recession. Even they were blamed for taking jobs that belonged to returning soldiers. Check out this photo. Many people think this is from World War II with the racism against Japan, but this is actually during the 1920s. Number 2, the Sacco and Vanzetti case. This case really reflected the prejudice and fear, for it was at the height of the Red Scare. Under A, April 15, 1920, 2 men robbed and murdered 2 employees of a shoe factory in Braintree, Massachusetts. Under B, police arrested 2 Italian immigrants, Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. They were both arrested. C, the 2 men were also known anarchists. Here's a photograph of anarchists marching in New York City in the 1920s. Under number C, please put down what anarchists stood for. They were opposed to all forms of government. Under D, evidence and witness testimony. The prosecutor claimed that the gun was similar to the one Sacco owned. His alibi was solid. He was selling fish all day, but the jury didn't believe him, and the eyewitnesses couldn't speak English, so the jury didn't believe them either. After 6 years, under E, 6 years of appeals, they were executed on August 23rd, 1927. Number 3, the return of the KKK. Under A, 1920s nativism led to new targets for the KKK. They were against Catholics, as seen here with this immigrant from Rome jumping off the diving board into the shark, the KKK. So they really were against all immigrants, you can put that down, and also Jews. Letter B, William J. Simmons, a former preacher, founded the new KKK in Georgia, 1915. He's pictured here on the right. He pledged to keep America white and Protestant. C, membership increased because he used professional promoters to sell memberships and because of its opposition to immigrants. Here are 2 pictures which are pretty amazing to me. On the left is a KKK march in the nation's capital in 1926. You know, men, women, children marching in Washington, D.C. It's just amazing to me. And then here, even more before that, Woodrow Wilson showed this movie in the White House. It's The Birth of a Nation, which is a movie about the KKK. D, eventually the KKK did decline in the late 20s because of scandals and power struggles. It also declined because Congress restricted immigration, so it took away one of the Klan's major issues or battles. Number 4, controlling immigration. So American policies changed in response to post-war recession and nativist pleas to keep America American. And just as an aside, Mitt Romney is known for saying this quote. All right, let's keep on track. So some business leaders once saw immigrants as sources of cheap labor, but they now saw them as radicals, potential risks. A, in 1921, President Harding signed the Emergency Quota Act. What this did is it restricted annual admission to 3% of the total number of any ethnic group already living here. So ethnic identity and national origin determined admission to the United States. And here's a cartoon illustrating how we're bringing down our levels. B, In 1924, the National Origins Act was signed, and it made immigration restriction a permanent policy. It set quotas at 2%. So again, that's 2% of each national group represented in the U.S. Census of 1890. Those numbers were used, which was really more than 30 years before. And so it really favored the Northwestern European immigrants that came during this time, and it was really against the wave of Southeastern Europeans that came after. To make my point, please look at the split here with Northwestern and Southeastern pretty even, and then look how the wave of Southeastern takes over, and then remember, 1920 we see it shift completely the opposite way because our country is biased against people coming from South and Eastern Europe, such as the Italian anarchists. Under C, Hispanic immigration. So with the cutoff of Southern and Eastern Europeans, employers still needed labor for, I'm now on to the back page, guys, in jobs such as farming, mining, and railroads. So Mexican immigrants were able to work because they were natives of the Western Hemisphere that was exempt from the 2% quota system. So this is on the back page, guys, finishing up letter C. People, natives from the Western Hemisphere, even Mexico, were exempt from the 2% quota system. So under D, there were huge irrigation projects the government sponsored in the American Southwest. It led to creations of large factory farms that needed thousands of workers. And so Mexican immigrants crossed the border in record numbers, and by the end of the 1920s, 700,000 had migrated to the U.S. Number 5, women in the 1920s. So under A, the right to vote was won in 1920, and many women began to break away from traditional gender roles. This picture here on the left shows how hard it was for them, for there were groups opposed to women voting, and this just shows one of their methods. Under B, attitudes toward marriage. I have pictured here a married couple from the 1920s. So the attitudes changed dramatically. It was influenced by the media, and so ideas of romance, pleasure, and friendship were linked to a successful marriage. And what I've been waiting for all year is to link psychology to history. So psychology makes its mark here in the 1920s. So psychologist Sigmund Freud, pictured here, he had theories of the unconscious, and it made talking about sex more acceptable. So dating started in the 1920s because of the car. So guys, under D, cars allowed young people to escape parental control. E, women traditionally worked, to help out their families, right, with their wages. But now, young single women worked to be financially independent. Most of them were college educated, and they sought careers, pictured here on the right. Pictured here is the flapper. And even though she was not typical of most women, she still set new trends and images for women. So for hairstyles, it was bobbed, which just means, shortened. For fashion, they wore silk, flesh-colored stockings, sleeveless dresses, and definitely shorter skirts. And their behavior certainly shattered gender roles. Pictured here, smoking, drinking, and dancing for behavior. Under H, achievements in medicine. Pictured here on the right is Florence Sabin. She did research for tuberculosis and helped to find a cure and reduce the deaths among the urban poor. Women writers, there were achievements in literature. So there were many prizes awarded. I looked up 2 Pulitzer Prizes awarded. So Willa Cather is here on the left. She wrote one of ours. And Edith Wharton, pictured here, wrote Age of Innocence. Both won the Pulitzer Prize in literature. All right, more sex in the 1920s, guys. For J, birth control. So please put down Margaret Sanger, pictured here on the right. She founded the American Birth Control League. It led to Planned Parenthood in the 1940s, and she really helped middle-class families control the size of their families. 6, fundamentalism. So other Americans feared this new morality, believing that their country was losing its traditional values. Many responded by joining this religious movement known as fundamentalism, And their main belief under A is that the Bible was literally true, word for word, no errors. Seen here on the right under C, they also were against the belief in Darwin's theory of evolution. Instead, they believed in creationism, that God created the world. Alright guys, I'm running out of time. I wanted to show a picture of some of these preachers, but under D, I want you to know who Billy Sunday was. He was a former professional baseball player, and he began to preach to huge crowds. He was very fiery and used, big showy speeches. And Amy McPherson, I'll show you a picture of her later on. She did these huge revivals and healings. She had these big theater-style crowds, and she used costumes and really put on quite a show. I think the biggest show of all, though, was an actual trial called the Scopes trial. So in 1925, Tennessee outlawed teaching of evolution. And so the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, advertised for a teacher who'd be willing to be arrested for teaching evolution, and biology teacher John T. Scopes volunteered. And so shown here, William Jennings Bryan, three-time presidential candidate, is the lead prosecutor, and this is Clarence Darrow. He's a world-renowned defense lawyer, famous trial lawyer, and he is the lead defender of Scopes. And so what is the outcome of the case? Scopes is found guilty and fined $100. It is eventually overturned on a technicality. What really happened, though, is that the radio broadcast Darrow and how he was ruthlessly attacking Bryan, which did lead to kind of a decline in the fundamentalist beliefs. 7. Prohibition. It was a movement to ban alcohol and had started in the 1800s, pictured here, but it really picked up speed in the 1900s. People supported prohibition because of religious reasons, because they thought it led to unemployment, domestic violence, and poverty. And so under A, the 18th Amendment is passed in January of 1919, and the Volstead Act, letter B, made the U.S. Treasury responsible for enforcing prohibition. This led to a huge increase in federal police power. Under C, Treasury agents made more than 540,000 arrests, but look at here. Americans still continued to ignore the law. They formed speakeasies under D, which were secret bars, shown here with a secret door, and this is during Prohibition, people drinking. Under E, rural areas certainly got around the law by bootlegging and producing their own moonshine. Under F, organized crime really thrived on the illegal trade in alcohol by smuggling it from Canada and the Caribbean. And so gangs, pictured here, began to rule the cities. The most notorious is Al Capone, pictured here. He was one of the most successful and violent gangsters. He had the police and judges on his payroll. Eliot Ness is pictured above with his group Special Task Force known as the Untouchables. So eventually Eliot Ness was able to convict and bring Capone down. And so the battle to end Prohibition really began from right after the 18th Amendment was passed. It did take until 1933 for the 21st Amendment to repeal the 18th. So overall, it was seen as a failure in improving society. This is Tevi signing off. Have a great night, and I'll check your notes tomorrow.